Hey, do you teach yoga? Have you ever trained to lead yoga classes, to be a yoga therapist? Have you ever owned a yoga studio? Maybe even just wondered what it was like for the women and men up there in front of the room on their mats, leading you through endless Surya Namaskars, down dogs, and pranayamas galore? Well, these are their stories, and mine. I'm Rebecca Sebastian, a 20-year yoga teacher, 10-year yoga therapist, yoga studio owner, and co-founder of a yoga-focused nonprofit. I've done a lot in the yoga world over the last 20 years, pretty much everything except had a water cooler. You know, a place to share stories, talk about struggles, successes, and find other people who do the same thing that I do. Welcome to Working in Yoga, a podcast and substitute water cooler for yoga folks to connect and build community, to share our unique profession, our challenges, and our journeys with the world.
Hey friends, welcome to Working in Yoga. This is episode 3 of my short series, Through the Looking Glass. So I want to start today with a scene, and let's sit with this visual for a moment after I say it. A therapist is in a session with a client who is in real distress. Think like a panic episode or a flashback or something acute. And the therapist says, gently, just take some time and notice what's happening in your body right now. Stay with the present moment. And that client doesn't necessarily calm down. In fact, the client could even get a little bit worse. And the therapist doesn't really understand why, because they read an article about mindfulness. Maybe they took a weekend training and it sounded like what they needed to say in the moment. Here's what that therapist doesn't know. Present moment awareness for someone in acute crisis can be destabilizing. That's not like a footnote. That's built into how many of these practices were developed over a very long time by people who understood the guardrails. They understand when a tool like mindfulness or present moment awareness helps and when it harms. And none of the safety rails of a long-time practice transfer when you strip the technique out of the tradition that built those guardrails around it. And that scene is what I mean by the extraction economy. Now, I want to call this episode The Caterpillar. There's a moment early on in Alice in Wonderland where the caterpillar keeps asking Alice over and over again, "Who are you?" And Alice can't answer because she's been growing and shrinking all day and she genuinely doesn't have a stable sense of who she is anymore. The caterpillar also sits on a mushroom that has two sides. One side makes you grow and the other makes you shrink. And he doesn't tell Alice which side is which. He just sits there smoking while she tries to figure it out herself. I think about that scene when I think about how yoga-derived tools move into other fields. The tool itself is real and it's powerful, and one side of it helps, and one side of it could potentially harm. And the person using it often doesn't know which side they're holding because nobody told them, and the people who do know aren't in the room. Here's the distinction I want to draw and I want to draw it carefully because it's not about hostility towards other fields. I really want to make that very clear. I think other fields are incredibly well-meaning when they do this. But fields like physical therapy and corporate wellness programs and schools and the military, these fields are largely hiring yoga professionals to fill roles. They're bringing trained yoga people in. That's what I would call integration. And psychology, by and in large, is doing something different. Cited yoga-derived tools like mindfulness as evidence-based practice without requiring the clinician to have training in it, or more importantly, a personal practice of their own. That's called extraction. One of those is we built something and now people who know how to use it are being brought into the room. The other is we built something and it got taken out of the room and we're still standing outside while someone else uses it on someone else without us. So I want to be clear again that this is not a territorial judgment. I'm not saying psychologists shouldn't talk about breath or attention or mindfulness or the body. I'm saying if you're trained and you have your own practice, welcome, genuinely welcome. We need you, and the work is better with you in it. But if you're not trained in our field and you don't have a personal practice, the responsible thing for you would be to refer out to other yoga professionals who have the training and the practice. And that's not gatekeeping, and it's not about protecting some kind of professional turf for its own sake. It's a clinical safety standard, and the same as any other modality where the tool is powerful and the misuse risk is real. Nobody thinks it's territorial when a general practitioner refers a patient to a specialist. Consider this sort of the same kind of thing. And here's something worth sitting with, especially after last week's episode. The organizations that are supposed to represent this profession and the fields that are extracting from it, they're not coordinating with each other. There's no sinister backroom meeting where they're working together to leave the rest of us out. But they're operating in parallel, and the effect is the same either way. Neither one of them is building anything for working yoga professionals. One isn't collecting the data that would show what's happening to us economically, and the other isn't bringing us into the room when our own tools are being used. Different problems, same blank space between where the infrastructure should be, and that blank space is starting to look like a pattern for us and not a coincidence. I want to give you one more example of how this shows up, because I think it's easy to hear extraction economy and think it's like something abstract happening somewhere else to someone else. But it shows up in small ways too. So think about how often you've heard someone, and maybe it's like a corporate wellness consultant or like a school administrator setting, where they bring up a mindfulness moment for students and describe what they're doing using language that comes directly from yoga or contemplative traditions, but without any acknowledgement of where it came from or any yoga professional being involved in designing it. It's not usually malicious. In fact, I would say it's almost never malicious. It's just that this tool got popular enough that it became free-floating, available to anyone, disconnected from the training that would tell you how to use it responsibly. And actually, this connects to something that we'll come back to later in this series when we talk about the organizations directly. Because one of the things that's supposed to happen, one of the things that the organizations exist to do, is to be the keeper of that connection. To say this tool comes from this tradition and here's who's qualified to teach it and here's where to find them. That's the whole thing they're supposed to be doing. And when that connection isn't maintained, the tools just drift. They become ambient. Anyone can pick them up and nobody's positioned to say, wait, here's the context that you're missing. So here's the deeper thing underneath all of this. When we let our tools get absorbed into other fields without us, without our presence, without our training standards coming along for the ride, we have accepted, maybe without meaning to, probably without meaning to, the version of this profession where we're just the raw material. Essentially, it's like the caterpillar's mushroom gets used by everyone, and the caterpillar doesn't get invited to tell people which side is which. Okay, so this week, here's your one thing to do. I want you to think about whether you have a referral relationship with anyone in allied health. Think a therapist, a physical therapist, a doctor in your local network. If you do, great. This is a reminder to you to keep that conversation warm. Send them a check-in, maybe send them a note. If you don't, here is a small doable step. Think of one person in your network who works in mental health or healthcare and have an honest conversation with them about what you actually do, even if you're just a yoga teacher, what your training covers, and where the line is between what you can hold and what needs a referral. You don't need to make this a whole campaign. It's not got to be a whole thing. You don't need a perfect script. Just start a conversation. These relationships tend to build really slowly, but they're worth more than they look like at first. I cannot tell you all how much of my business as a yoga therapist came from those relationships. Okay, next week we're heading somewhere that a lot of us have complicated feelings about: online teaching. What happened in 2010, what we walked away from, and what's left behind. Now, let's go get to work, and I'll catch you around the water cooler next time.